Alright, as I finish out all the big awards movies I need to see that aren't, animated foreign or documentaries, we're looking at these two, both of which obviously I've been anticipating for quite some time. One probably more so than the other, and I was thinking of starting with Macbeth because since it's the one I'm a bit more enthusiastic about, but I think we'll go ahead and start with Licorice Pizza, which of course is the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which might as well be, an event every time you can say that now. Though, I have been saying recently that I'm not quite as passionate about Paul Thomas Anderson as I used to be. Where, like, I still worship at the altar of Boogie Nights and Magnolia and There Will Be Blood and stuff like that. And I really love Punch Drunk Love, and I like Heart 8 a good deal also. And then it was about the time The Master came around, where I was starting to kind of cool off of him just a little bit. I still really like Inherent Vice. I still really like Phantom Thread a lot. But, like I said, not as passionate as I was about his earlier movies, so I wasn't as, jumping out of my seat excited for this as I probably would have been years ago, but there's still, it's the way he seems to be going into all these different territories, which of course is something that he's always done. But this in particular, kind of exploring like high school and sort of young love and stuff like that, is almost so unexpected from him, I guess you could say. Especially with like how some of his other movies tend to be known for their sort of coldness, and this is like almost all warmth. This movie's got a bit of a dark side in it, but for the most part, and even that stuff is more like darkly comedic than anything else. And I do love the way that he's sort of, because obviously there's been comedic moments in his work before, but with this Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, and now this thing, the way he seems to like almost be leaning in to the absurd when it comes to inserting comedy. Because Phantom Thread has hilarious moments for as dark as it seems. And of course, Inherent Vice was practically a comedy, and then this basically is, it could be the first genre you label it with, on top of romance, I guess. But what's interesting about this and its approach is I heard going in, it's just I was trying to keep the hype down as much as I could because I know how I feel about Paul Thomas Anderson these days. But when I started hearing all of the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comparisons, how it was basically his Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was I could barely think about that because I didn't want the bar to get way too high. And yeah, as far as it being like the obvious comparison would be Linklater, but the thing about that is this whole idea of being nostalgic for an era that you weren't even alive in, which is something I talked about a lot Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and we've talked about it with stuff like American Graffiti and Grease and stuff like that. And while that's not really what I got from this, I think this one, I mean, obviously people, especially who are, from the area, I'm sure, will have that. But like I said, even if if you've never even been close to that area of the country, like I said, and it was a decade or two before you were even born, the way movies still have a way that they can get you nostalgic for a period you know nothing about at all, is something really magical that does happen. And while that didn't quite happen to me here, I do think there's just as much to be said about it being nostalgia for like young love and stuff like that, and it's really just youth in general, which is where probably a lot of the Linklater comparisons would come from. Um, and it's I don't want to go, and that's the thing too, is anything that I could have against this movie in that regard is not at all the movie's fault, because most of my memories of young love are not fond. But it's like if I isolate those feelings from like the truly awful people that set them off, awful person that set them off, it's I can still get the idea of how well this captures what he was going for. And it's Paul Thomas Anderson, so of course he's going to capture well what he was going for. It's just a matter of like I don't think Paul Thomas Anderson is capable of making a bad movie. Like it's a thought that you can't even comprehend the idea of that because it just wouldn't happen. But when I say that I'm getting like a bit colder to his movies from The Master forward, it's like that I do feel like that's more of a where I'm coming from personally kind of thing, and I wouldn't even begin to try to criticize him too hard and say there's something he's not doing right. Where it's strictly this sort of personal connection thing, and that because that's the kind of movies that he makes, where you just kind of really feel this. We'll kind of talk about this with Macbeth too, where sometimes what you take away from a movie is just a feeling that's really hard to even try to put into words. Um, and this, as far as Licorice Pizza goes, does have a lot of the stuff where it puts you in there enough the way that he can, especially with his long takes. And I've talked a lot recently about how the long take is becoming something that's getting way played out, especially in action movies that are trying too hard. But he's still one of the absolute masters of them, and there's plenty here that just kind of completely immerse you. Like these really subtly long takes. Like every time I see a long take in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, I never feel like it's trying hard to draw attention to itself. You just kind of get sucked into the environment of whatever you're seeing, and there's a lot of that here. And also, oftentimes it's not even tracking shots. Sometimes it'll just be the camera sitting in one place, kind of waiting. Like obviously one of the great long takes in movie history is like that whole entire 60 seconds that's just on Mark Wahlberg during the Alfred Molina scene in Boogie Nights, and stuff like that. Like the scene where Gary's just sitting at the police station, just sort of waiting to figure out what's even happening to him, it is gold. And it's like, and there's even moments in there that are broken up where we have cuts to Alana like outside, but it's still almost like from the camera sitting there to when he's released, all basically feels like it's one shot, even though it's not actually. And stuff like that is really great that he can do seemingly effortlessly at this point. Um, and we do have those tracking shots. We've got like when he's trying to like launch his whole waterbed thing, and we're going through that whole place. Kind of gives you memories of the opening scene of Boogie Nights, and the Life on Mars scene when he's running down the gas line. Stuff like that. That feels like something you would have seen in like a coming of age movie from like the French New Wave or something. And so I'm all on board for any time he just lets the camera go without cutting or without cutting too much. The phone scene kind of comes to mind also when he calls her and he's just kind of she calls him back and it's just this whole silence there, and that's the stuff like that really works as far as being immersive. Like if the nostalgia's not completely working, he still finds a way to get you there in the moment that I really really appreciate. And you'll notice that the one of the stars of this movie, obviously, when you talk about Paul Thomas Anderson and the whole world of actors that he's created here, with Phil Seymour Hoffman's son, Cooper, being the lead here. And it's interesting how, like, you would think it's just like, oh, there's nepotism at work again, which was kind of my first thought. But then as the movie goes on, you realize just how many people that are like kind of Hollywood royalty that are in this movie, big and small roles. You kind of start to see enough of a theme to where it's like, okay, that in itself works also. But then there's the whole idea of, even if it might have been really easy for him to get this job, it's still that's still you living in the shadow of Philip Seymour Hoffman. That is a massive, massive, massive shadow. Not to mention it's a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. So like the expectations were so impossibly high. And what I especially love about that is the fact that the whole reason Gary's character works as well as he does is the total and complete confidence that he has through the whole thing. Like that, his confidence is unbroken pretty much the whole time, regardless of all the shit that happens. So even when he's just randomly scooped up and taken to the police station, and he there's a little bit of panic in there, obviously, when he doesn't know what to do. But you still get the sense that it almost seems like he's just constantly in control of wherever he is, and like because everybody knows him, and he always knows exactly how to work himself into wherever he is, to ultimately get to potential success. And the fact that this is supposed to be like, in another movie it'd be like it's almost unbelievable that a 15-year-old would be as confident as this guy. But the thing is that he really wasn't. He couldn't have been that far off. I think he's 18 now. So he really wasn't far off of that when he was playing this role. So it's almost like that seems to just come to him naturally. which is crazy. And like I said, the fact that you wouldn't even know this is, somebody that would depending on your outlook, have something to live up to. With the Hoffman name and being in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and let alone the lead of it. And that's because even, I mean, I guess you could say Hoffman was a co-lead in The Master, but the fact that Hoffman himself never like led a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, despite being a key player and like all the ones except for like There Will Be Blood. Even like Hard 8, he has the most memorable scene, and it's one scene. And that's, yeah, and like I said, the confidence just oozes off of him is enough to make you hate him out of envy, almost. But at the same time, you really want to see him succeed, and it's always this, and the way the characters in this, how that's basically what the movie is. Like, I guess some people could say it's plotless, but it's, like I said, no more or less than, like, something in the Linklater vein. But it still kind of feels like people are just kind of constantly trying to find their place. Especially with Alana's character, where she's at the age where it's like, she's still living at home, she's still hanging out with a 15-year-old dude, and it's like she realizes that there's gotta be another place for her in life, and so she's just kind of going from job to job and, potential dude to potential dude, and just kind of looking for a place here that's almost like a calling or something. And it's like, by the time we get to the Benny Safdie scenes towards the end, you really start to get that vibe of, has she finally found something? But you can still see somebody that's kind of like, sort of, in a panicking sense, looking for what her life's eventually going to be. And I guess I won't go too much into the end, since I still don't know how many people have seen this, since it still seems to be struggling to go wide. I can't believe I only just saw this, finally. But, because there was the whole thing where it was supposed to go to 2,000 theaters at Christmas, and then they bumped it back down to 800, because I think they were afraid of Spider-Man or something. So it's still making its way around, but yeah, we'll just say I'm still processing the ending, and I don't know how I feel about it, and I can completely get why other people are saying that also, but, I guess we can go ahead and go into that real quick, which would be, not the ending itself, but the age difference, which is something that I was having trouble kind of getting past, and the way that the movie almost, like, they address it, and it comes up relatively frequently, but it never seems to be a conflict, which is really weird. And it's another one of those things where you can get caught up in, if the roles were reversed, this movie would feel really, really gross, and how you stand on that, and if it's a double standard sort of thing. People seem to be really forgiving of it with this movie, and the only thing I can think of is that comes from Gary's confidence and how, because on that point, the poster, when it first came out, and I saw it, and I wasn't really familiar with, like, what, I knew Hoffman was supposed to be in it, I wasn't quite sure what he looked like, and I wasn't really familiar with Alana Haim either, and I didn't know what the story was, so when I just saw the poster, I assumed they were the same age, and it was just that kind of story, like they just went to high school together or something. I did not realize there was supposed to be a 10-year difference between them, and in real life I think it's like 11 or 12 years, so it is, I don't quite know. I think that's one thing that's keeping me from connecting to it more than I could, is it is a little weird how not so addressed that is, but still kind of. The fact that it's even kind of addressed still, it only kind of adds to how I don't know about that. But not to get too caught up in that, I guess, to talk about all the other aspects, that was kind of holding me back for a while. Like, it kind of got to a point where how she seemed so immune to his charm at the start. When it gets to that point very early on, when he gets a job and he has to fly out, but he needs a chaperone, and then it just cuts and they're on the plane and she's the chaperone and she's going with him, and she's like totally in with him now. I kept waiting for there to be a cut and for that to have just been a fantasy sequence of his. And it's like, it was kind of jarring that it kept going. It's like, oh no, this is actually happening. It's like, that's how quickly they sort of fell in line with each other. But once we eventually got to a point, this movie does have a taking off point where it did win me over, and it was like, okay, I'm pretty much invested in this now. And I think that was around the time Sean Penn showed up, because then we get into it's kind of the whole thing there, because you have the scene where he gets wrongfully arrested and stuff like that, and it's this sort of completely unpredictable nature of what in God's name is going to happen to them next, that really keeps this movie going, and is really the charm that's continuous throughout it. But it's about the time Sean Penn shows up that it really feels like we're getting this sense of, like, it's kind of event after event and memorable character after memorable character coming in and out. And it's like, that's the thing where, if there's a criticism that the movie is plotless, it's like, the more sort of vignette like it gets, the more I was into it. Where it just kind of became like a series of adventures depending on who the next guest star was. Started to become really fun, especially since all these side characters are like really giving it their all. Obviously, Bradley Cooper just got that SAG nomination, has had award buzz the whole season, and he's in this movie for like 2 or 3 minutes. He's in this movie for about as long as Martin Short was in Inherent Vice, which is crazy. how much he uses every single split second of that screen time. And like I said, it's the unpredictable situations that really bring this to light also. And running into these characters where it's like, some of them are just straight up real, like John Peters. And then there's clearly people that are like, they are real life people, but for some reason they're under different names. Like Christine Ebersol towards the beginning is clearly Lucille Ball, and then Sean Penn doing William Holden, where even though those aren't their names, Christine Ebersol's character's first name is Lucy, and Penn's character's last name is Holden. It's like, it's interesting how they kind of go from, oh, this is kind of this, but not really, and then straight into, oh yeah, this is totally this, as it goes on. I think Benny Safdie's a real person as well. And then you have, I think, Tom Waits is supposed to be Mark Robson, and so that's there's one where he's saying the title of a movie that's not quite the title of a real movie, but it's almost the title of a real movie that Robson did. So, and like I said, that's when it kind of started to really win me over, was when we were just kind of going from moment to moment, and it didn't really matter what was next. We were just going to deal with it when we got there, because you just kind of have to embrace whatever happens next, because you don't know what craziness is going to follow when you get there. And that's a really exhilarating feeling going into a movie, especially when it's reaching its halfway mark. And I do think once we get to the Benny Safdie stuff, as great as he is in it, and Joseph Cross has a really great scene in there as well, that's where I kind of started to feel a little tired by the time we got to the Benny Safdie portion, but because it's fairly lengthy for what it is. I think it's like 2:13. And while a lot of that does kind of flow by really nicely, it does. The beginning and the end, I felt like I kind of had trouble pacing wise, but maybe that's just me. But the Joseph Cross scene is really good also, and kind of brings fire back to as it's going into the very end of it. Joseph Cross is really scoring. He just did a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and then last year is fresh off a Fincher movie. So good for him. I'm talking about the way Gary goes through these situations. There was another sort of irresistible vibe I was getting from this movie, and that was the vibe I started to get. I feel like around maybe the John Peters scenes and then the scenes that followed, I started to get the vibe of, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. Even though this movie's set in a certain time period, to me it feels like it's a movie, not the setting, but the movie feels like it's something like from the 80s or something. And if you grew up with parents that watched those kind of movies, this feels like the kind of movie that your parents would have been watching, that you kind of grew up with throughout. And I'm wondering if like there'll be later generations where people that are like our age now will be watching this, and their kids will see it from that perspective, and then that'll be that movie where it's like your parents liked it, but it's also that cool movie that you like when you get to be that age also. And then as soon as I had that thought, it immediately occurred to me how much this movie was giving me like Risky Business vibes, which I was really appreciating. Like I said, but particularly the John Peters scenes where Peters is almost kind of playing a character that feels a little like Joey Pants in Risky Business, and that whole thing, and the whole idea of like him being the really confident guy, and he's got the girl with him that's much more mature than he is, and it's like that. That's the vibe I was getting from this, which was not something I was expecting, but I was very much liking. So it has that going for it, and I was talking about how it looks, like cinematography wise, with Anderson, of course, doing his own with or being the co-cinematographer, I guess you could say. And we get shots like, those great long takes, those subtle long takes that don't draw attention to themselves. And then there's also just some individual shots where it's like, when you talk about the vast nature of what he's accomplished with the different kinds of movies that he's made, we were talking about at the beginning. And it's like you see a movie like this that almost feels so intimate and nostalgic for a certain era, and it's like, it's almost mind-blowing to think the same person made There Will Be Blood. And then there'll be shots that come along where my favorite shot in the movie is the shot of Tom Waits walking across the golf course. And it's like the fact that in this sort of, intimate movie that's a significantly smaller scale to something like that, it's in this shot of Tom Waits walking across the golf course that almost feels as big as any shot that was in There Will Be Blood. And that's... So stuff like that was really working for me also. So... yeah, I don't know if there is anything else that I wanted to bring up. I guess just mainly, as I didn't really talk much about Hines' performance, but she's kind of got the same thing going on I was talking about with Hoffman, where it's like that sort of, even though it's both their debut movies, even though she already had experience with Anderson through music videos, I learned, there is something that's so sort of natural in how you can imagine this would be the same performance from somebody that like had basically grown up in the business and like the acting specifically, and gone into this so almost like supernaturally natural, and it probably helps that like her family is played by her family, so like that, like I was saying, it's weird how much how sort of familial this whole cast is. Like DiCaprio's dad is in there towards the beginning, and it's like the faces that show up here, and it's like if we hadn't just recently lost him, I know Downey Sr. Was in a few of Anderson's previous movies also. So it's like you kind of always have that vibe anyway, and it's like it could be a bit alienating. Like it could sometimes give you that feeling of Hollywood's a big club and you're not in it kind of thing. But there's also something about it where it feels like that sort of once upon a time when Hollywood came out, the term love letter got thrown around way too much and way too overused and basically started to lose its meaning. But that's the term that's coming back around. Just when you talk about this area and just a love of movies in general and that sort of Hollywood or anyway, that's what comes to me. So there is that, and like I said, the fact that you can get just these little fleeting moments like Bradley Cooper playing John Peters that already feel iconic in their own way, when it's just the span of like a couple of minutes, and I feel like that's gonna be a classic scene down the road. Cooper's first scene, and that's yeah. So the last thing I wanted to mention was when we were talking about the age thing. I was I didn't know what was up because I went to after I saw it, I went to its Wikipedia page and I saw that it had a controversy portion on its page, and I was like, oh, that's got to be about the age thing, and it's like, cool, let's see how they address this. Like maybe let's see if Paul Thomas Anderson has addressed it and explained where he was coming from, and it was about the John Michael Higgins scenes. And it was something about like the way he does the voice, and how apparently the controversy is that there's no pushback from other characters to say this is a wrong thing. But I honestly was not even thinking about that as far as a potentially being controversial, because it seemed pretty clear that his character is the idiot of the scene. That felt like it needed no explanation. And it's like in his wife there like looks miserable when he's doing it. So I don't. So that it's weird to me that this has a whole controversy portion on its Wikipedia page, and it says nothing about the ages. It was about that. But okay, whatever. Of all the things, there's also that moment at the beginning when Alana walks by that guy and he just slaps her ass casually, I guess to say, hey, it's that era. Um, but no, the John Michael Higgins scenes being the controversy is an interesting choice. So, all right. But yeah, that's how I feel about that. Like I said, I'm not. I wish I felt more of a warmth to it, but I can certainly admire it, and there's definitely some things I really love about it. But I do think there's those pacing issues towards the beginning and towards the end, and I say this with caution every time I talk about Paul Thomas Anderson because it's like and I completely understand this. I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those guys where if you criticize one of his movies to his face, he would just start choking you. I don't know if it's maybe I just saw that Magnolia documentary one too many times, and he's more mellowed out now, but I'd still be. I wouldn't criticize the guy to his face. That's what I'm saying. And like I said, I totally get where he's coming from. I've been there, so. But yeah, I can really appreciate this and see where the love is coming from, even if I don't feel as passionate about it. That's like I said, I feel that's more of a me thing, so I don't put that on the movie. But I do like it quite a bit. But let's go into Macbeth. And there are to talk about. What I was just talking about Licorice Pizza, we got to go back into with Macbeth, where I was talking about how sometimes movies just sort of give you a feeling that can be really hard to put into words. And what I really just want to start off by saying is that Macbeth seemed like another one of those movies that would have been impossible to live up to. Ever since it was announced that Joel Coen was making Macbeth starring Denzel and Frances McDormand, and he was going to be shot like basically a Fritz Lang movie, all I could think was, there's no way this is real. That is a fantasy. That is the kind of thing you're sitting around with your movie-loving friends and you're talking about, wouldn't it be great if this movie existed? And you do like fan casting, you do like different ideas, assign directors to different kind of movies and different actors and stuff like that. And some of them are so incredible that they're too good to be true, and they can never be realized because they would be too perfect if they actually existed. And somehow, I feel like Macbeth is that movie. And somehow it broke through and managed to somehow exist in this world with us. When it would seem it would be impossible for a movie that has so many perfect pieces come together, and every single one of them is just right. This is another case where I could easily see people being really cold to this, but and to the point of where I can almost say like it's from a technical standpoint that you can call it a perfect movie, but it's that feeling that's really hard to put into words that's underneath this technical perfection, that's really pushing me to say that this movie was everything I could have possibly wanted it to be. And I can't even begin to describe to you how high that bar was going in. And there's really nothing else this movie could have done. It's when you set a bar that's impossibly high, there's only so far you can usually get, and it made it just right to the top. It is like just there reaching that exact and you would almost think it's that for a movie to be this good and to be this passionate about it, it should exceed the expectation. But the fact that this movie is pretty much exactly what I wanted it to be, where it's like it's that really tiny bullseye that seems impossible to reach. It's like I said, I don't know how. Well, just to kind of go through it, the opening scene alone, not a lot of adaptations don't use the bloody captain. But as soon as the bloody captain appeared out of the fog, and it was Ralph Ineson, he of the God voice, it was just so many good vibes started coming to me, and I was like, this is gonna be everything I want. Like it can be that fast, and it's like, and you could say it's your idea going in, but it's like more often than not, if you go in with a high bar, it's not gonna reach it. So I mean, you could say I went in knowing I was going to love it, because of course I did. I knew, of course I did. There was no way this was going to fail to me. And I know sometimes those are like, famous last words, but I just knew going into this there was no possible way this movie could fail, and it doesn't. And so after we get that introduction, and we set all this, and it's like what's so interesting about the production design here also is just how minimal it is, where it's like it almost feels like Dogville in a sense, where it does kind of feel like you're kind of on a stage, but then at the same time you've got, these buildings that feel like they're literally miles high at times, but still like everything's so. It's just really kind of set to a stage in itself, but also feels like it's in this really gothic other world. There's a lot of times where it just straight up feels like a horror movie at times, and honestly, Macbeth just generally lends itself to that anyway. Whether it be the events that transpire or like the visuals, like the use of ghosts, which typically you can take as hallucinations from the other characters, but I mean, there's still something really supernatural always lurking about this story. And obviously, starting with the witches obviously throws that in already, but I mean, in a sense, like throughout, there's just something so sinister about this story that's captured in this movie visually in a way that hasn't been yet. And there's so many versions of this, and it's because Fassbender's movie felt more like like almost a war movie in a sense, and then you got like showing all the battles that the play never felt the need to show us. And you've got Wells's version, which is great, and somewhat like when I went into this, I was kind of expecting something similar to the visuals that Wells did. And then if you want to talk just like sort of a straightforward, straightforward but still incredibly artistic and extremely well done, the Polanski version is one of the best. And then there's just the stage recording with Ian McKellen and Judi Dench, which was always my go-to as far as like learning, like getting the words in your mouth and stuff like that. But this one, as far as like exuding a feeling, like really really putting you in the feeling enveloped by the whole thing. I didn't mention Throne of Blood, obviously, that as well, but this one in particular, like I said, it has that feel where it feels like you're on another plane completely, like almost like we're not even on Earth or something, and it's just so otherworldly in itself, and it's like I said, I really struggle to even put it into words, but it's and I think a lot of this started off. I talked about the Audison scene at the beginning, and then of course we have the scene with the witches, essentially, with Catherine Hunter doing the whole thing. And as soon as I saw that, I mean, as soon as she's on the screen, you hear her voice. She's not even on screen yet when you hear. The very first thing we hear is her voice over a black screen. And that in itself already just transports you. Before it's even come on, it comes on with that. What is that sound? It's like a projector turning on and off or something. And it's incredible. And it was like these kind of movies where they really, because it was starting to make me realize how boring a lot of movies are now in regards to their appearance and the way they're able to pull, like, I don't know how to do this. The movie's amazing to where my brain is scattered at this point, but like really just letting the visuals tell the story themselves to where you just instantly feel like you have to get engrossed in a movie, and it has to do a job of transporting you, but like to be able to do that, to be able to take you to another place entirely as soon as the first frame has come on screen is so. I don't even know how to deal with it. But then you see Catherine Hunter playing the witches, and you get this shot where obviously she's one person, but then that reflective shot where you see two other reflections in the water underneath her, and then the way that dissolves into two shrouded figures, and both the witch scenes, the Something Wicked This Way Comes scene, the apparition scene, that comes in later also is such a... Because I know there's some adaptations that almost try to omit the witches entirely, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the fact that this embraced that so much that the whole movie feels supernatural to its core, with these scenes, and the way, like I said, the way Hunter feels like she's not even human, and it was so, I didn't know the voice should have been a dead giveaway. I didn't know until the credits that she was also the old man. It just didn't. I said the voice is a dead giveaway. I don't know how I didn't notice. And that also, like, that choice really gives you the vibe that just everything is, like I said, in this sort of supernatural state. I know a lot of my words are getting repetitive, but I run out of vocabulary trying to describe the experience that is this movie. Um, and the way, like, those changes that Cohen did make as far as the adaptation, because you could say it's easy to just, do Macbeth again. But it's those changes that he put in, like I said, the fact that, Hunter plays all three witches essentially, and the old man, it feels like it's kind of setting this whole scene anyway. And the fact that the old man kind of acts as like a sort of, commentary after Macbeth has taken over, and the fact that the witches are the ones that set this all off to begin with and had the vision to begin with. But then there's also, like, when you take that and then you also take Ross's place here, which is clearly changed. Like, he's the third murderer now, and feels like he's pulling the strings in so many different ways. I feel like Ross's involvement in this adaptation is something that's going to be analyzed for years, and can be analyzed for years. And the same thing with Hunter being one actress that plays like four characters technically, and that's the thing is, like, I feel like this movie's just gonna keep on giving the more I see it. When the first viewing is so rewarding already, like, that is so exciting beyond words. Like, I struggle to I struggle to elaborate as much as I can. But another feeling that this movie gave me, not just like it's a movie that's constantly giving to its audience, but there's times here where it just feels like it felt like a truly special performance in the sense of, obviously, I've been a lifelong Denzel fan, but really, like, post Fences is when I've been practically obsessed. Like, whenever Denzel makes any sort of move whatsoever, I want to be there to see it. And it's the idea of him playing this part was something that I was just so overwhelmed with anticipation, and because you just knew that this was just going to be something insanely special. And the whole idea of him and McDormand being, a bit older than you would expect, how it's almost like there's more of lives lived here that are pushing them to make the choices that they make throughout this. But to watch Denzel play this character is one of the big parts I was talking about. Of it almost feels like this movie's too good to even exist. Like, the idea of it is like, there's no way that could exist in this world. It would be too overwhelmingly incredible. And then there are moments here where there was one moment in particular I really want to single out, and that was when he's talking to the servant. Like, in the play, when he's talking to the servant, and he says, "Go prick thy face, never read thy fear, thou little-livered boy." Whenever I would read that line after knowing Denzel was going to be in this movie, that was the line I wanted to hear Denzel say. Because I was like, I could hear Denzel saying that in other movies. I can just imagine it. And when we reach that point, because we've been disappointed before. Like, I think my favorite line in the play is, "Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." And the fact that Fassbender, like, blueballed us on that, where he said the lead-in, "The Prince of Cumberland, that is, stepman must fall down or else over a leap, for in my way it lies." And then you didn't say it. And many adaptations have those moments where they omit certain lines that you're waiting for, and they don't come, and that can be a bummer. And when... Not only did Denzel say, "Go prick thy face and never read thy fear, thou little-livered boy," he said it, he went full Denzel on it. He went full Denzel on that line specifically. And it was at that moment I felt like the movie was catering to me specifically. Like the movie was like winking at me and saying, "I see you, specific audience member." And that's a really special feeling you can give the audience. When it feels like the movie was basically made for them, which is what I feel like with this movie. I feel like everything I could have wanted out of a movie was willed into existence, and this is what came out. And that's... like I said, I don't know how else you can go into that. And of course, you know, the thing about Lady Macbeth that's interesting is you get performances like, Marion Cotillard's gets singled out a lot, even if Fassbender clearly does not have the best, you know, that movie, Justin Kurzel, I should be singling out more than Fassbender, but that's the easy way to identify it. Is the one I keep coming back to here, but it's definitely not one of the best adaptations, but I know Cotillard gets singled out specifically, but the reason I'm indifferent to Marion Cotillard's performance in the Justin Kurzel version is that it almost seems like her casting almost seems too obvious. Like, the fact that she would kill that role is so expected that it almost feels kind of like uninspired to even cast her to begin with, even though she did kill it. And you could probably say the same thing about McDormand. But there's these little moments here. And sometimes there's moments where she feels almost modern. Like, it almost feels like her character in Three Billboards comes out at times. But then you get moments like the sleepwalking scene, where the whole idea is she comes and goes, and she doesn't see anything. And she's just, you know, all she sees is, you know, the blood on her hands. But then there's that moment that they added in this one, where the last time she says to bed, she turns and she sees them. And which, by the way, is absolutely chill. That's more chilling than than most things I've seen in horror movies. And it's moments like that I feel like really stand out with her performance in particular. And the fact that you can see her as somebody that would take command and can make... Because if you're going to emasculate Denzel and get him to do what you think he should do, you've got to have the most... There was no other person that's going to be able to do that except Frances McDormand, as far as I can tell. And it's like, if there's another person, they're not coming to mind immediately. And that's, like I said, it's weird how perfect this movie is. And the sound, we could talk about the visuals, like everything looks, you know, like gothic and foggy and like a horror movie. We could talk about that all day. The letter burning against the night sky. Good God. Denzel, when he says the line, when he says, "Stars, hide your fires, I don't light my black and deep desires," when he's... It's just that shot, and like I said, that minimal set where it just looks like the ground in front of him and the night sky, and that's all that's there in front of him. It feels like a shot that you would see out of like a classic movie or something, like even from the silent era. And it's... But the sound... right, so you got like that projector sound or whatever that is, that bookends it. I think it's somewhere in the middle also. But you also have stuff like how heavy the footsteps feel, or the back and forth between the sound of his steps and Duncan's blood dripping. And then when we see the porter, when we see Stephen Root, and they're starting to, like, dripping and steps are starting to blend together here. There may have even been a heartbeat in there. I don't know. But it was... A lot of that is really the star of this also. And it's... And the way, like, Hunter's voice, like, multiplies when she's, like, multiple witches. It's, like, so... It's I don't know what aspect you can talk about, what aspect you can criticize about this movie. Like, at least from a technical standpoint. Let alone, like I said, just the visceral feeling it could give somebody that's really connected to it, like me. And you've also got, like the kill scenes, for instance. There's one I want to talk about that's really harrowing, but then I want to talk about one that's just... it just makes me want to stand up and cheer. But we'll talk about the Duncan's death scene. Obviously, we're not dealing with spoilers. It's fucking Macbeth. So, this idea... Once again, I was wondering how close the adaptation was going to be, because one of the questions I always have going into a new Macbeth adaptation is... are we going to see like Duncan's death or not? Or are we just going to see him go in and out like we do in the play? And the way they do this, I think most adaptations do show Duncan's death, but this one in particular, the way that it's shot, and like I said, the way everything else around it is so minimal, when he wakes up and Denzel's over him, and the way he pushes the knife in so slowly, and so you can like see the point of penetration. There is something here that is so, you like when you wake up, you feel like you're being smothered by Denzel, or you're about to be smothered by Denzel, and it's this very sort of claustrophobic feeling that's really intense. And the whole idea of when he sees the dagger, and having it be the door handle is an image that's just like like I said, one of those things you would just brainstorm about and say, man, wouldn't that be like really poetic and really, interesting visually, and you actually see it, and the way that it's pulled off so perfectly is, I can barely deal with this movie. I want to see this movie over and over and over and over again, and I can barely deal with it. But then there's another kill scene that's just kind of incredible in a very unexpected way too. In this sense that obviously we're at a point towards the end where Macbeth thinks he's invincible because clearly the force isn't going to move, and doesn't seem everybody here seems to have been born of a woman, so there's no way I'm going to die. So the way they handle this with the young Seward fight, where he may just be Seward in this. I don't even remember seeing the old one, but it may just be him as one character. But this fight, if you can call it that, because you think about the fact that Denzel has made a career out of being a badass, right? He's done a lot of action movies and stuff like that, and he's just known for having that general badass way about him. And I don't know if I ever would have guessed it would be a Shakespeare adaptation that would give what might be the most badass 60 seconds of Denzel's career. Where I mean, let's run this down. So he has no weapon on him. Seward's got a sword and a knife, and he's coming at him, and he's fighting him with no weapon. He's dodging him. While he's dodging him, he manages to work in a bitch slap in there somewhere. And then when Seward finally is disarmed from his sword, Macbeth gives it back to him. And this continues until in one fell swoop, Macbeth disarms him entirely, stabs him in the back, and walks out without ever looking at him, and is almost out the door before his body even hits the ground. There are action heroes and action villains today that could never reach a level that cold-blooded or that badass or anything. Or, honestly, quite terrifying also. When he's approaching him, like, even when he gets sliced in the face, the way he, like, barely breaks eye contact the whole time is... it's like, you really see... Like, when he's reaching that point of tyranny, I feel like is reached in an effective way that we haven't quite seen in an adaptation yet. You would think, Wells or somebody... I really love the McKellen performance, too. Would reach those heights, but it just... With Denzel, it just felt like it hit different in this way, and it's... Like I said, to be that commanding... And of course, he's not the only commanding presence, of course. When he leaves, he's going to fight Macduff, and Macduff in this case being Corey Hawkins. And Corey Hawkins is a great choice also, because he also has like a really commanding presence. I was kind of reminded, not that they're similar performances, but when you just think about Corey Hawkins having a commanding presence... I was thinking a lot about his performance as Kwame Ture in Black Klansman, and the fact that he can really just completely control the room like that. And in this scene where it feels like this ultimate face-off between Macduff and Macbeth, obviously, is, one of the great confrontations, but I mean, like, Denzel and Corey Hawkins as well. And, like, Corey Hawkins having to match that. Where it's like, you talk about how you needed Frances McDormand to play Lady Macbeth because who else was going to play Lady Macbeth than Denzel as Macbeth? And it's like at the same the same thing works for Macduff, where it's like you needed a specific Macduff to be able to stand up against a Denzel Macbeth. And Corey Hawkins, I think, found that. Seemingly pretty effortlessly, which is great. So, that's... Yeah. I mean, is there anything we didn't really touch I don't believe so. That's, like I said, that's at least all I can do as far as that. I could, you know, in maybe a month or so, I've already seen this like maybe 5 or 6 times or something. I'll just watch it on a loop at this point. And God knows we have so many other things. Like I said, the way Ross is incorporated into the story, you know, the more, something tells me the more you see it, the more you'll be able to dissect that for days. So, and you know, Hunter's performance and that whole presence here, it's just so. Like I said, it doesn't feel like I've seen it now, and it doesn't feel like a real movie. It feels like I said, "What if," and just described the greatest thing ever, and then somehow it came almost like a witch brought it to life with a spell, and it exists now. It's crazy. So that's how I feel about Macbeth for now. I'm sure I will be significantly more enthusiastic the more I see it. So that's what I'm going to stick with for now. So the next thing is, they're supposed to be doing an awards video, but I don't know what it'll be, because I think it's still going to be another week before we do the predictions. I have no idea. I'm going to have to find that out. So in the meantime, the Eternals video with my brother just went up, and the next movie reviews, I'm not really sure what they are. I haven't, with everything moving around a lot, I haven't really been looking at the calendar. I just wait for them to show up, and then we'll see what happens. Cyrano should be next week. With what, I don't know, but we'll figure that out as we go. So, yeah, and then that'll probably wrap up awards movies, apart from animated, foreign, and documentary. So, we'll see what happens with all that, and what the next month or so brings. The next few months, really. So, until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.